House music culture and club culture in general has that theme of no matter where you come from and who you are, all walks of life are welcome and loved in a common space. Whether anyone knew or not, the music itself embodied those characteristics as well. The evolution of the genre itself was accepting to all parts of the world and all genres. If it weren't for pirate radio stations or specifically record stores working their absolute hardest to source records from overseas, there wouldn't have been such an effective spread of music from all around. For years, Italy had been developing their own sound of disco, and it had been becoming very popular in their clubs, if not dominating everything in the club scene there. It was eventually picked up, and this music was sourced to record shops in places like New York City's Vinyl Mania. These Italian disco tracks with sexy album art would only inspire and transform the house sound within the United States itself. This is where the pinball reference comes in, because immediately this is being picked up in Italy again, and this place where disco music had washed out their clubbing scene is now finding interest in house music for the first time and getting producers of their very own. In this video, I'm going to do my best attempt at trying to make a house track from the 90s that's inspired by italo-house. I hope you can sit back, relax, and watch this video and maybe learn a thing or two. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button, and maybe even ask a question if you have it. For this project file, we're going to be making a italo-house inspired house track. In order to do that, I wanted to just point out a couple key elements that I'm going to try to maintain. For example, the use of synths, specifically like string sounding synthesizers, was used a lot in Italian disco music, and also the use of piano chords. I've been listening to a lot of reference tracks, and I'll just play one for you real quick just to show you what I'm going for. A good way to nail that early house sound is to borrow something straight from disco music, and that's the use of a foundational layer of bongos and congas. I also chose to go with a slower tempo since we're going for an earlier house sound. Also note how we already have a 4-on-the-4 groove established. In this production, I'm going to challenge myself by leaving out one key element, and I want to know if you guys pick up on it. Okay, what I just did there was I changed that Congo loop from MIDI into audio so I can manipulate it even further. So I froze the audio. Now I'm looking for a secondary Congo loop so I can just have a little bit more of a thicker foundation. I found something I liked and I pitched the audio up a little bit just so I could get a more punchier sound. I'm also messing around with a little bit of the warp settings here, specifically the texture setting, just to see if I like how it sounds when it's time stretched a little bit. That's pretty good. As you see, I already have like quite the established groove going on. This is a multi-use rhythm. This is a prime example of how electronic music borrows. I could go and easily like play some Cuban music chords and we'd have a whole other genre going on. Right here, I'm on the search for an EQ preset. I like this rack tom one. It actually brought that to life quite a bit. So I'm just gonna go with that, not overthink it too much, and keep moving on. I'll pop it down in volume a little bit just so we have a new reference of what loud is. I'm acknowledging the fact that I want to preserve headroom by doing that move. Upon listening to the reference track again, I realized the bass I wanted to go for was a clean imitation bass guitar sound, doing an almost walking bass line. If you work in the DAWs, you know this struggle. Good grief, I finally found something. Oh god, now you gotta bear with me while I figure out a bass line, but it gets good. So I've recorded the bass line. Now I'm just going to saturate a little bit. EQ, minor adjustments. I'm just rolling off a little bit of the mid and boosting the highs just in case there's anything that wants to come through. Oh, second saturator that I didn't really like. I'm trying to preserve an analog warmth. I do not want to over digitalize my sound, which is going to be inevitable because look what I'm working on. I try not to slap too many effects on each sound individually. I try to see first what I can do with EQs and compression and saturation. Since I'm specifically going for that old school vibe, I want to have a reduced quality of sound in a sense, in a calculated, sculpted manner. So in terms of EQing the bass, that meant rolling off any unnecessary high frequencies, but preserving those mid-range frequencies as well. I like to work in this live screen here so I can create a series of loops and even variations on the loops within the same instruments themselves. So if I wanted to do a secondary bass line, I could do that here, but I'm not going to do that with the bass, since for this genre we like a continuous looping bass. Oh yeah, I also assigned a groove to this bass, MIDI. I don't remember when I did that, but it's there. I was now on a search for a good organ sound. You know, that famous organ chord stab sound that was so prevalent in early techno and house music. Does anybody know the origins of this organ? I really am looking for that. Any history on this? This specific Native Instruments preset is clearly like based off of a house hit. I'm just jamming around some ideas on the keyboard that I have, just playing them out until I find something that I like, and then I'll record it. Alright, so I gotta quantize these notes after recording them because I always have latency on my keyboard and I don't feel like changing the sample rate back and forth for the sake of workflow speed. This is the section where I have to be a little more careful with sound selection. I'm trying to find the best piano sound to play those italo-house chords that actually came from disco music. Once again, I'm kind of playing some ideas out on the keyboard until I have something I want to record. After a lot of preset switching and messing around with different chord progressions, this is what I figured out. And now my goal was to dirty up the sound a little bit because it was just, once again, too clean. It wouldn't be realistic for mimicking early 90s, late 80s kind of sound. Some of you might think that it's sounding worse as I process it, but that's kind of the goal, and it's gonna glue together more in context when it's with the other instruments. I'm pretty sure it was common back before DAWs to get a little distorted once in a while with home recording equipment and whatnot. So that's why we have janky sounds in early techno and house music. I add a little bit of echo here to, well, actually specifically an echo preset just to check it out, and I actually liked it. I just needed to adjust it a little bit to fit this purpose. Added some nice stereo wideness. Drum time. What, you got questions about this? I'm just kidding. So I establish a 4-on-the-4 groove with these hi-hats a little bit more. It adds as a reinforcement to the congos and bongos. Bongos and congos?
Bongos and congos.
Look, man, the hi-hats are simple. You just want to mess around with the velocity a little bit, but... Oh yeah, and a groove. Just a little MPC groove right there. I chose a swing, as you could call it as well. Makes those notes that are on the grid just a little bit off the grid, without you having to shift them yourself. I thought I was doing some flume shit by stretching the MIDI around, but didn't sound that good. Need a little open hi-hat action. What I'm gonna do is layer a couple hi-hat sounds within an instrument rack to get one whole open hi-hat sound. And I'm gonna mess around with the panning of those individual sounds too. Like I'll pull one of the sounds down really low in volume and over in panning. I'll do that with 2 different ones so I get a balance. Now I need a series of really tacky crash cymbal sounds. We love previewing sounds, and I feel like a lot of YouTube producers skip that, but you're gonna listen with me. Nah, psych. Putting these drums really low in volume. You don't need crash cymbals that high in volume. They cut through a lot with that high frequency. Do you guys ever hit the space bar a million times when you're just trying to hear that first second audio? Okay, so it was time for a reverse crash now. Something that I could put at the 8th bar of the loop. It would draw a conclusion to the end of the chord progression. Or the loop, I guess, because the chords aren't really going anywhere. Okay, I locked in a snare/clap sound on the 2 and the 4. I was really just looking for the proper sound. Once again, this is sound selection issue. I'm looking for a good drum machine sound that already has a vintage feel, I guess. All right, next up is a secondary snare that does kind of like a fill rhythm. This was the first thing I recorded, and then I realized I had a little too many notes, so I eventually deleted a lot of them. I wanted to leave space and not overcomplicate things. Less is more. I'm going through a mini crisis right here, and perhaps it's just because my ears were getting fatigued, but I was previewing snares like it was no one's business. I had the rhythm that I wanted, I just didn't know if the snare sound itself was fitting. While I was stuck on this, I decided to change up the snare rhythm a bit and add like a little fill at the end to also help out with the turnaround effect of the loop. Here I add another snare layer to the existing instrument rack. Just trying to thicken up the sound. I think I was listening back and forth with the reference track and realizing I just didn't quite have a full enough sound for a snare. The best thing you can do for yourself within Ableton when you're processing your drums is just throw a drum bus on the group. It's going to give you a lot of immediate possibilities to sculpt your sound within the drums, because it's a transient shaper as well. Now I'm putting a little bit of reverb on the snare, and I just have to lock it in. I'm going for a small room kind of sound. Just enough reverb to make it not sound like there's no room at all. Right here to thicken up the rhythm section, I add a rimshot. At this point, I felt like I was almost done with the creation of my track. I was just lacking something to act as a lead. So I was on the search now for an acapella that I could chop up and do some vocal chops or some sample chopping or something like that. grabbed this Erykah Badu On and On acapella that I had found. I manipulated this sample with my keyboard, and I was playing it through Instrument Rack in Ableton. I dragged the sample into Instrument Rack, and I selected the slice feature, and I just used the default transient chops that it selected, and I came up with something. I was looking for a second part of the same sample to chop up, or loop or something like that. But I had to turn the warp marker off and freeze it so the audio was not trying to catch up to like the BPM of this current project file. I spent a little time playing around with what it sounds like if I pitched it up or down. Ultimately, I was just trying to match the key of the production that I'm making. Pay no attention to where these MIDI notes lie. I'm only using my ears when it comes to chopping this sample up right now. I only chopped these samples. I didn't really do too much effects processing to it. So moving on, I decided that the track still needed a little bit of a clap to reinforce that snare sound. I know I said I was almost done earlier, but I just needed a couple more last transitional sounds. I grabbed this sample and specifically was just looking for this one scream, that soul singer scream. Those are always perfect. Like James Brown did it a lot. James Brown screams work well. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna process the scream after I figure out where I wanna put it. And I think I'm gonna use it as a end of a loop kind of situation. So I figured out where I'm gonna place it. And now I have filtered out with an EQ the low and the highs just to muffle it a bit, and also added some reverb through send and return effects. And lastly, the biggest thing here is the echo effect that I have on here, doing that washed out repeated note sound. The key thing within the echo effect is to use the EQ and filter out what the echo coming back is going to sound like. And that's the secret sauce to how to do that house music soul screech sound. Remember, just a little bit of reverb to blend out that echo, and then you're set. This was a last-minute decision. I just copied the chords that I played on the electric piano over to a real piano. So like duplicated, reinforced, same chords. I had to mess within the VST itself just to change the sound of the piano to be more harsh. And I also added a gate effect to make the piano chords sound even more choppy. A little bit of OTT to bring out the high end, and a little bit of EQ to just smooth it out a bit. The final critical element of italo-house, in my opinion, is the use of string synthesizers. I'm pretty sure that comes from disco music and also how much history they have with orchestras in their country. I'm almost sustaining the same chord the whole time. Right here, I am recording a second string section that plays for the second half of the 8-bar loop at a higher register. That completes all the musical elements that I want to add to this production, for the most part. So now it was time to record all this series of loops out into one whole arrangement. This is not the step to be super picky and trying to nail your idea 100%. This is something just to hash out a rough structure and play around with cutting elements in and out This is a step where you can really feel like you're playing your piece live to an audience. You can close your eyes and really imagine that. I have so many elements, and I feel like I've done a good enough job with the production that I don't need to do a lot of automations to create more movement. And also, since it is a replication of a 90s style, there weren't that much automation possibilities anyhow, besides like volume and stuff you could do with faders. Has anyone picked up on the missing element yet? Well, if you haven't, I'm going to spoil it now. I didn't add a kick drum to this because I wanted to see if I could preserve the 4 on the floor movement and motion without physically adding a kick drum, which is usually known as the most crucial element of building a house or electronic track in general. Potentially by removing the kick drum in total, it changes the genre a bit. I don't know, but I still think there's a good sense of 4 on the floor and a danciness to it all. And when you go back to listen to early, house music examples, late 80s, early 90s, there's not a super overwhelming kick drum anyhow. Once everything is laid out, you can kind of go in and cut things out or do some fine tuning. That's what I do here. I think the hardest part about forming dance music is remembering to loop the sections out long enough. Like, you can really get repetitive with it. I forget that personally, and it messes up the flow of things sometimes. This is the most exciting step to me. It's where I get to really make the beat that I've made punch. I do it always at the end, but I guess I could do it a little bit before the final step. I'm putting a limiter on the master channel and soft clipping it while having the output still pretty low, and then I'm putting another limiter on right after to bring the volume up after I know that I've leveled out the transients a bit with that soft clipper. Listen to how loud it gets, and clear. If it was 100% accurate, but this was the best that I could do in terms of recreating a 90s house track in the italo-house style. If you are interested in perhaps listening to this track, I'm going to put it up on Bandcamp, and you can check it out there.